Hello and welcome. Today I'm making this abstract landscape. I really wanted to capture a sense of calm and serenity by adding stitching that enhances the beautiful colors of the fabric that already exist. So join me start to finish as I add stitching in complementary colors with small areas of contrast to create this calm, serene, abstract landscape. Let's get started. I'm starting with a simple collage of just 3 fabrics on top of felt. And I like this composition so much that I almost don't want to stitch on it. My goal here is to keep everything simple. Yes, I'm going to add stitching, but I want to preserve this beautiful initial collage and only enhance it with stitching. So I've added a few stitches, still very, very simple, in just a couple of places, in a couple of different colors. Now I want to add some more to it and watch this develop, while also keeping in mind I want to just keep this really clean, really simple, uncomplicated, fresh. I'm just moving around the piece, adding some marks in matching colors because I don't want too much contrast here. I just really am liking the simplicity of this. I continue to add some straight stitches in different orientations. I'm sticking with colors that are very, very close to the background fabric, except for a few areas where I'm having contrast. Now I'm thinking about adding another color, just a deeper shade of this rusty brown. And I think that this might add something. And this color of this fabric is similar to the plus sign marks that I've made in the middle of the piece. So I think I'm going to fold this little piece of fabric in half and add it to the bottom. So I'm just going to iron it. And now I'm going to stitch it on the bottom. So I'm sticking with this theme of not wanting to contrast too much with the colors that already exist. So I've chosen a floss color that matches very closely the fabric, and it's the same color that I've used in the middle of the piece, making the plus signs. So as I move along, trying to stitch this on the front and the back because it's folded, I'm realizing that I can have some help with some clips. So I pull out some clips and I just help this piece to stay in place. It's not moving around as much when I'm stitching. I could have done this from the beginning, but this is sort of a problem-solving move when I'm halfway through doing what I'm doing and it's not too late to use a pin or a clip to help. So now that that's stitched on, I'm going to cut away the excess at the edges. And now I'm thinking about the piece of golden yellow in the middle and how the edges of it are frayed, and I really like that look. So I'm going in with my needle and I'm fraying the edges of this fabric I've just stitched on. It's got a clean edge and I want it to be just a little bit frayed, like all the other pieces in this really simple collage that I've done. I have a few other pieces of this same beautiful mahogany sort of colored fabric, and I'm thinking about bringing it in another place or two. I just move it around and snip it and find a place that I think feels good. This is really an intuitive process where I'm not thinking too much, I'm just looking and moving quickly, and I move right away to stitch those in place. I'm using a matching thread again. I'm not looking to create any contrast again at this point. I'm really using the fabric as my color and my mark. Now what I'm doing here is sometimes you want to move your thread along to get to another place, and what I do sometimes is I bury that thread in my batting to move it along instead of leaving it just on the back, just so it doesn't get caught on anything. Sometimes this makes stitching easier later. I didn't actually have to go that far in this case, so I could have just moved my thread. Both would have been fine. I'm just using simple stitches, moving down the middle of these pieces to stitch them in place. And I may add some other stitching later to them, but at this point they're secured in place. So now that I've added those two pieces, I'm thinking about the upper area of the collage, and I was looking for a deeper shade of green. So I've snipped a little piece and I'm moving it around to decide where I want it, and I find that place fairly quickly, and so now I'm going to stitch that piece on. I found a thread that matches. It's a deeper shade of green than the stitching that's in the background of that lighter green. It matches really well with this little piece that I've added. I've decided to go in the other direction with my stitching on this one for a little bit of contrast, and because the color matches so well, it's not going to be a huge difference. It's more of a texture contrast in this case. This makes it a little more interesting, and that piece is quite a bit brighter than the green that's in the background, so it's nice to accentuate that with stitching. I'm taking that same color of green and I'm adding it to the area where I've already added some blanket stitching in the lighter green color. And I'm going in between those original stitches with this brighter green color to bring that color into another area of the piece. So that's going to unify the overall look of this slow stitched piece by having this color in more than one spot. Now I've moved back to these darker patches, tiny patches that I've added, and I'm adding some stitching in the other direction. Instead of straight across, I'm going up and down with tiny little stitches. This is securing the piece down and also adding some texture. So I'm just going to move across this piece with these tiny stitches. I'm almost out of thread here, so I decide I'm going to knot off. So now what I've noticed is that some of the marks that I made early on aren't showing up as much as I'd like them to. So I'd like them to be more noticeable. And so what I'm doing here with this golden yellow color is I'm going back where I've already stitched and I'm stitching parallel. So I had come in and I had done one line and made some marks. Now I'm going back and I'm stitching a stitch beside, very close beside, every mark that I'd previously made. So it makes each original mark thicker and darker, and it stands out just a little bit more, which is the look that I've decided I want here. And as I move to the top, I decide that I want to add some additional marks because I'm liking the way that this looks. So I continue and I just move over a bit and I add a few more stitches, and I'm doing the same thing where I'm doing 2 stitches side by side. So that's the same type of mark. There's just more of it now. Now I'm going to do the same thing with these crosses or plus signs that I'd originally made, some of my first stitches on this piece, and I like them and I feel like I want them to stand out even more. And now that I have these darker patches on the piece, they're not standing out as much as they did at the beginning. So what I'm doing now is I'm actually going over top of the stitches I had originally made. I'm going over top of the stitches that I had originally made. And so they are going to become thicker and darker. You can see the first few I've made are looking thicker and darker than the other ones. So I'm going to continue and do that to every original mark. I'm not changing anything here. I'm just accentuating what's already there and making sure that those marks don't disappear in the stitching that I've done, because I really do like those marks. So now I can see them much better than I originally could. So I'm happy with that. Moving to the bottom and adding some more stitches in my darkest color to that dark piece on the bottom. trying to integrate it with the stitches that are above. It's a matching color. And then I'm going to turn my attention to my orangey brown color, and using that same color that I already have stitched in the background, this lighter orangey brown color. So I'm moving across, adding a line above my new collage piece. And then I'm going to turn and I'm going to add a line underneath. As you can see here, I change the way I'm stitching. I start to go in and out, making stitches and pulling. This is the nice thing about slow stitching, where you really have options about the way you stitch. You can stab stitch, which is just going from the front to the back and coming back out again, or you can stack some stitches and make a line. Whatever works, depending on the effect you're looking for, what's comfortable in your hand. There's lots of options. So I'm continuing in this color and I'm moving down around the area where I've added some light green stitching. And I've decided that what I want to do is add some more of this lighter color, and I'm going to stitch more intensely. So this is going to contrast with the stitching that I had done at the bottom in this darker area. So it's still the same color, it's just a lighter tone and it's heavier stitching. So there's going to be a small amount of contrast here. Now I've decided to do some blanket stitching. Along the bottom, I'm taking that piece of rusty brown and I'm folding it under right to the edge of my felt. I'm only doing the blanket stitch as far as that one area of stitching, and then I'm going to switch. I'm still using that lighter color, and I'm just going to continue to stitch heavily in that one corner before I switch back to a blanket stitch around that corner, and I'm going to join up with the blanket stitching that's already there, and it's already in that same color. So I'm just going to stitch in between the stitches that I already have to add a little bit more texture and color there. Then I'm going to hop over the green stitching that's on the edge and continue in this same color for the rest of that side, all the way to the corner. Then when I get to the corner, I have a decision to make. Am I going to continue with the blanket stitch across the top, where I already have some straight stitching in that lighter color, or should I enhance what's already there, adding more lines? Either one would be fine, but what I decide to do is to add some more lines of straight stitching, and what that will do is just echo what's already there, make it more of a bold mark and a bold line in that color, which was an idea I had initially that I still like and I still want to do. This is another nice thing about stitching this way, is I initially made that one line of stitching and I could have come back later and decided that I didn't want it, and I could have added some blanket stitching there. And so in a way, it's like when you're painting a picture and you've painted something and later you cover it up, or maybe you decide you're going to leave it. There's options in stitching as well. So I'm skipping past the green where I already have stitched and moving to the edge. Continuing with this same color, I'm going to stitch all the way down into the lighter rusty brown color. Now I've switched to the golden yellow color and I'm adding some more of those same lines that I had enhanced earlier on the right hand side. So I'm doing the same stitch where I'm taking two stitches right beside each other so that the line stands out a bit more and so that it matches what's on the other side. And I'm doing the same thing in the middle of the piece with this golden yellow color, enhancing what was already there and adding some new lines. I'm going to move my way up towards the brighter green piece with these lines of yellow. I'm looking at the top of my piece. I decide I want some darker marks in the darkest color of the rusty brown, but I don't exactly want the same blanket stitch that I've done in other spots. So what I decide to do is add these blanket stitches that are close together, and so what they end up looking like are small areas of solid color separated. This is a bit of contrast, but at the same time I'm using the same stitch, so there's some unity as well. And when this color is stitched together, making more of a solid mark, it really shows how well it matches the darker rusty brown color that can be found in the fabric patches throughout the piece. And now it's time for some French knots. Since I already have a few French knots in green, I wanted to add some more. So I'm starting over in the corner here with this darkest color and adding a few there. And then I'm going to move up and use my golden yellow color and add a few French knots up there. So now I have French knots in 3 different places on my piece, which adds some unity, and they're different kinds of marks than the other ones that I've made. Now I'm using my darkest color again, and I'm moving to the bottom of the piece, and I want to make a heavier area of stitching in this darkest color to differentiate it from other areas, adding a little bit of interest. It's just a little bit darker than the background fabric, so it's not a huge contrast. It will add something extra in terms of texture and mark. Now I'm looking at this green area at the bottom and doing the same thing I've done in other parts of the piece. Instead of adding stitches right beside to enhance and make these marks stand out more, this time I've decided to go right over top of the stitches that already exist. So they're going to be a thicker, darker color, just slightly different than the sort of double stitch that I've done in other places. I felt like this green had sort of faded away. It was one of the few places where I have a stronger contrast, and it wasn't really showing up enough. So I think that just adding this extra layer in this darker green color on top of the lighter green color that I'd originally stitched is really making a difference. And you can see there, I've done those first couple of rows and it is really standing out more. I've decided I want one more piece. I'm really liking this mahogany brown and I wanted to bring it up to the top. This time I'm going to stitch it on with green because it's going right beside a darker green piece. So I'm stitching around. It's showing up a little bit more. And I think that helps blend it in. And it adds that finishing touch that I'm looking for. So here we are. It's finished. It's an abstract landscape with lots of matching colors, very little contrast, so many little interesting areas. I think I've maintained that sense of simplicity and calm that I was looking for in the beginning, and I've added something extra. Thank you so much for joining me. See you again next time.